What's up, everyone? Carmen here with Pittsburgh White Shorts, bringing you another deck tech. Today, I want to talk about 8 standby Dengeki Bunko. It was really awesome and really surprising when this got announced for English in the most recent stream, but that's really cool. I'm a really big fan of Bunko sets. I really like playing all the different anime together in one deck. Kind of feels like you're playing standard, even if it might not be that crazy power level. You get to see a bunch of different anime all in the same deck, and that is really fun. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to actually build Dengeki. There's the 8-bar deck with Aramanga Sensei and Aremo. There's the Mahoka stuff. That's a whole deck kind of in and of itself. There's the Strike the Blood package. Strike the Blood, one of my favorite guilty pleasure anime. And I was really happy that you can build that in a bunch of different ways. There's things like Pants Choice, Pants Standby. But the coolest part about the Strike the Blood stuff is you actually don't have to play the whole Strike the Blood package to play the Yukina, the big part of the combo, the 2-1. You can actually play that in 8 Standby. And those other decks playing the whole package with the Kojo that sort of clocks itself and brings out the Yukina, that really felt really clunky to me. I tested a bunch of different builds of that, didn't really like it. 8 Standby was actually a lot smoother. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. The deck looks kind of weird at first glance. There are no level 1s, and we'll get into why. But we mostly have a bunch of utility pieces at level 0 going into our level 2s at level 1 game plan. And then, of course, the star of the deck is the Tomoka, the Rokyobyu finisher. It kind of works like Yo. It pushes extra damage on attack, quote-unquote RNG, flipping cards off the top of the deck to burn either 1 or 2. Also, I have some alternative options here. We'll talk about those when we get to them. But let's just go through the zeros. We have a lot of utility pieces here. So we have the Shauna event Rize. So on play, check up to 3. If you reveal an event, you can add it and then discard a card. Modular deck speed and some filter, only really hits on our holo event. And then it is also a back row runner. You can send a Dengeki Bunko character in your waiting room to the bottom of your clock, card to the back row. Plussing zeros and zeros in Dengeki in general aren't really the highest quality, but the fact that this is not only a modular deck speed, maybe filter tool, as well as a plussing 0 if we get locked at 0. We don't want to stay at 0 too long. The fact that this clocks ourselves is also good. To just give us another attacker for the next turn made this really good, but it's not that good. It's not super premium, so we're only playing 3 to shave slots to fit some other cards in. Other really important about this card is because it selectively clocks a card if you open this card and the Tomoka, which has to be in your level for the entirety of your deck to work. You can actually mulligan the Tomoka to maybe get into a standby climax or another piece for later or another playable level 0, because you'll put this down, put the Tomoka in clock with the effect going first, which is always nice. Moving on, we have the Sasha. This is a Fuka 0, so on death, you discard a card and then check up to 4 for a level 1 or higher card. So we don't really play any level 1s, so it's going to be level 2s and higher. And then on attack has a really unique effect. You can reveal the top card of your deck if it's a level 1 or higher. Choose specifically level 0s, specifically only in your opponent's front row, and you can shoot it. Because our level 0 power lines are actually very low, the fact that this can remove a card from our opponent's front row so that maybe one of our cards can direct, as well as, if the level 0 goes long, it's the main way we're going to actually kill cards, which, isn't that great, but it's also stapled to a really good utility effect. We want to fill our grave because we're playing 8 standby early to have our targets there, as well as find our pieces for level 1, which are all level 2s and higher, to have in our hand. Moving on to our brainstorm. This is the standby specific brainstorm, only hits on standbys, and but because it only hits on standbys, it is a 5-card brainstorm. And then when you hit, you can check up to 3, add any card to your hand, ditch the rest. This gives us a little bit of better deck speed than a normal brainstorm in the early game, as well as digging us into more standbys so that we can slam one every turn. Once we get to level 2, pretty much all the standbys in our deck functions the same for our purposes, so any standby that we draw ends up being totally fine. So the fact that this can rip us into more at any point in the game, as well as give us some really good deck speed, both even when we whiff, but mainly when we hit, is really nice. And then it's also a global 5 if you have the 3/2 Tomoka in your level as well as on your board. So you have to have the level condition as well as having another one on your board, so it's only going to be live from level 2 onward. Moving on, we have this Minori. It is a drop salvage. It gives another character 1,000 power, typical drop salvage effect, but then it also might plus when this card gets reversed, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's level 2 or higher, you can pop this card back to your hand. We run a lot of level 2 and higher. Again, we don't play any level 1s, so our only cards that are whisked for this are our climaxes and level 0s. So it's going to be about a 50% chance for this card to hit. This is mainly in here for filter and yellow fix, since again, our brainstorm is a top check 3. So we have to have ways to, not only we're filling our grave, so our grave's going to be our main toolbox. So we're going to have a drop salvage here as opposed to something like a drop search. And also the color fixing for yellow is really nice. 2 of the Len, this is a level swapper on play. The whole deck doesn't work if the Tomoka is not in level, so we have to hit that by level 1. I am on record as usually hating this kind of effect, having to have a specific card in your level at level 1. Previously, with old quality cards, it was actually really difficult to hit that condition, but with cards like this, as well as the general overloading of utility profiles and lights in the modern era, it's actually pretty consistent to make sure you have the Tomoka in level when you go to level 1 with good effects like this, especially when they are stapled to cards that are pretty good in an 8 standby deck anyway. Because this card has pay 1, sack it, check up to the top 4 of your deck, nice modular deck speed there, and add a level 1 or higher card, so it can also add our holo event. The fact that this does not take up a board slot is really nice for standby, specifically because you can put this down, sack it, get it off there, and have a spot open for standby. These have a little bit more value than normal in 8 standby strategies, as well as again making sure our Tomoka is in level so that we can play the game. 2 index Ricos, discard any card, reveal the top card of your deck, salvage a level X or lower, where X is the level of the revealed card. Usually going to hit level 2 or higher, hopefully. There's a lot of level 2s in the deck, but even if we hit level 0, that's the main reason we're playing this card. We are filtering out heavy cards with this to specifically grab more utility pieces for later. Also has an on-attack pump effect for other characters for 1k, which is pretty nice considering because are mostly just throw away utility cards and bad attackers anyway. The fact that this can at least make one of our other lane bigger on offense is a nice extra effect for a Rico. Moving on, we have this accelerator and last order. It is a Kazuma type effect, but like a Rumia, you have to discard a character and it only checks up to 3 as any card, so a little bit of filter there, but important part here is it is yellow and is also a bomb, which is pretty nice. The fact that it is a decent attacker at 0 as well as being a yellow utility piece made it in here as a one of. This definitely isn't necessary. This is one of those flex spot cut cards or maybe some alternative options later. This is the Rokyobu standby support card. This is one of those cards that just pops back to your hand and gives power when you play a standby to clear a spot for you to standby a card into. Typically, you are standing cards with your standby climaxes in this deck, so this might be sort of in the front row, pop itself to hand, and then a card goes there and gets stood, but it'll be functionally used the same way as in any standby deck. Also has another unique effect if it ends up staying on the board, where during your turn, if you have that 3/2 Tomoka on your level, which you must for the whole deck to work, and you have another one on board, again, similar to the brainstorm, all of your other characters gain 1,000 power. So at level 2, you can get global 15 to your board with the 2 level 0s if you leave this on the board and you have your brainstorm down, which you probably will. Nice little bit of extra on turn power, the fact that you can pump it for spot power if you need it, or if you're trying to sort of edge over all lanes with spread power, you can leave it on the board. This gives you some power options for making sure you win board on offense. And lastly, we have the Yukina Shuffleback support, where you can on play take up to 2 of the 2/1 Yukina and put them specifically on the bottom of your deck. There are some neat plays with this that you can make with the Tomoka in the late game and on your finish returns. If you are forced to go all in where you know you don't have another turn, you can maybe do some stuff where you mill down to the bottom. Again, we have that check 3 brainstorm. If you're compressed, being able to turbo down to a small deck is fairly reasonable with that brainstorm and other cards in the deck. It's not that hard to set up. And then on play, choose one of your other characters, give it 2k power. So a little bit of power pump to make sure it is not a dead draw early in the game. And I'll get into how putting those 2/1 Yukinas on the bottom of your deck might be something you want to do, even though we are not summoning Yukinas out of deck with this like we normally would if we were playing the actual climax combo for the Yukina. It is still good with our Tomoka later. All right, moving into our level 1s. This is our level 1 quote-unquote climax combo. If you have a 3/2 Tomoka in your level zone, this card gets -1 love in your hand. Again, need to have this Tomoka in your level zone for a bunch of cards, and this is no different. Actually really nice that you don't have to have a full board condition to early play this, like similar cards. The fact that you can just drop this down and have open slots is actually really nice. And then the climax combo is really simple. When you play this standby, choose one of your other characters and stand it. We usually don't play these kinds of effects even in standby decks because the things that we stand usually aren't that good. That is actually not the case for Dengeki Bunko. We have a lot of good targets that do things that we want to stand throughout the game with effects like this. And the first one of those is actually the 2-1 Yukina. So again, we're not playing the climax combo, but every other line of text on the card is important. If all your characters are Dengeki Bunko, which they will be, this card gets 5,000 power, so it is a 10k. And then when this card's battle opponent is reversed, if you have a climax in your climax zone, fill the top card of your deck. If that card's level 1 or higher, add it to hand. So note that it doesn't matter what climax you have down. So no matter what climax you have in your climax zone, when this Yukina is on the board, she can potentially plus you. In the 1k1 version of the decks, you are a lot more beholden to playing off the top of your deck, which didn't really feel good and was very clunky at times with the low selection. But in a standby deck where you're just like filling your grave, trying to get the raw value of the bodies on board, and any cards that you might generate with a plussing effect like this are just a bonus to refill your hand on that turn. The fact that we can bring out this Yukina with our 2-1 climax combo, immediately stand it and run over one of our opponent's cards makes it pretty good to potentially get that plus back and get that big body on board at level 1. And again, at 10k throughout the game, even throughout the mid game, you're going to find ways to get reverses with this Yukina and continue to get value out of it, continuing to coin flip for more pluses later. It actually ends out working up better than playing the climax combo itself, which sounds weird. It sounds like there's more going on, but it's actually a smoother and more consistent experience to play this Yukina with the standby than it is to play her with her actual combo, in my experience. To support the Yukina, since again this 2-1 Yukina only has one soul, we are going to play this additional Rokyobu standby target. This is a 2-2, your sort of typical 2-2-2 soul hand on core standby target, except with a twist. It has to be in your front row center slot to get an additional 5,000 power, and you got to have that 3-2 Tomoka in your level zone for that as well. So you get a giant 12k 2 soul hand on core beater that just sits in the center of your board and swings every turn. Pretty decent as an auxiliary standby target. Ideally, your opponent will not be able to clear your Yukinas, crash into them, and then your Yukinas will be able to swing for 2s into the open lanes on follow-up turn. But if you feel like you are behind in damage and you need to immediately have that 2-soul swing to sort of catch up, this is an option. Or again, if you just trigger later in your attack step and you have that open slot open, you can just slam this down and it will stick around for quite a while. Next, we have one of the coolest cards in Dengeki Bunko, the Toradora support. So it has a couple abilities here. It is first and foremost a level assist. You can rest it to give a character on your board 2,000 power for the turn, and if you have 3 or less markers under it, so it can get a maximum of 4 markers, choose a character in your waiting room, place it underneath this card as a marker as part of that effect. So this card can stock up to 4 markers underneath it and give 1,500 to front to say level 3s, 2,000 to level 2s, and then another spot 2k on top of that. That would be pretty good in and of itself. That's a lot of utility just for an assist. The fact that you're having those markers, get some passive compression, maybe thin some level 0s out of your deck to make your Tomoka better later. Just some ways you could use it, but it gets even better than that. When you play the 3-2 Taiga stock swap, you can use 2 markers per stock to pay for her cost. If you have 4 markers, you can play her down for free, or if you have 2, you can just pay 1 for the overall cost of her. But if you have an odd number, you're just going to have an odd marker there. So the longer you can drag out of the game at level 2, the more, hopefully markers you have under this. If you hit an extra standby, since we're standing cards to the front row, normally this is the first card that you put out at level 1 on that extra standby that you hit. Instead of putting another card in the front row, you'd preferably set up your board so that you have the 2-1 and the 2-2-1s and with this in the back, supporting them, making the Yukina 11k and your 2-1 climax combo 8k, which is still pretty big. And then later on, it just makes that stock swap or ping burn effect from the Taiga that much more threatening, considering you can do it for cheaper and cheaper as the game goes on. Moving on to a couple counters here to round out the level 2, we have the 2-1 memory kick as well as the hollow event counter. So this is a 2-3 counter. You can play it so that you means you can play it on your turn or your opponent's turn as a backup. You choose one of your characters, and during this turn, it gets 1500 power and the following effect. When this card's battle opponent is reversed, deal 3 damage to your opponent. So you can use this as sort of a burn counter backup on your opponent's turn, or if you have the resources, play it in main phase to get an additional burn on reverse on your turn. A little bit of flexibility there. Normally you are using this as a counter. You can get really tricky with it, considering that you actually don't have to give the 1500 power and effect to a battling character. Say you triggered some climaxes, like you had a small deck and you're about to go over deck, but the lane that your opponent is currently attacking into is maybe a crash or something that you were already winning, but you were losing another lane. You could immediately pay that 3, paying out any triggered climaxes before you refresh, and then giving the effect to the relevant lane for later. So you can get pretty tricky with it, using it both on your turn and on your opponent's turn at differing timings, since you don't have to give it to the battling character. It's been a really fun and unique card to play with. It's been really powerful, and just being able to burn a big amount, unlike the usual character burn counters that have only been 1, the fact that you're burning a relevant, like, actual amount of damage that could reasonably, if your opponent's a higher damage at level 3, maybe even kill them outright if they're not playing around it specifically, is something unique that Dengeki Bunko can do as a defensive standby deck. This kind of defensive counter that's burning your opponent kind of more aggressively slanted, that other defensive counters kind of don't do. Where other defensive counters elongate the game, this sort of pushes to finish the game. So it's pretty unique and very fun to play with. Moving into level 3's Tomoka, the star of the deck. Couple effects here, quite a bit of text filling up this card. When this card attacks, if you have the 3/2 Tomoka in your level zone, so a copy of this card, you mill the top 2 cards of your deck to the waiting room, and you burn X, where X is the number of level 2 or higher cards revealed. Now you're seeing why our deck is so slanted towards 2 and higher. We're trying to increase the chances that our Tomoka burns for 2 or at least 1. Usually the way you should evaluate a card like this is that it's usually going to burn 1, and if you burn 2, that's really nice. Now remember, we have that utility card that can bottom deck 2 Yukinas, and we have a check 3 Brainstorm that can turbo through a lot of cards. On our finishing turn, when we absolutely must burn our opponent for as much as we can to close the game, we can bottom deck those 2 Yukinas, get all the way to the bottom of our deck, and set up our attack order so that we will mill those 2 Yukinas and get a guaranteed burn 2. Sounds a little bit harder to do than it actually is. You actually do get a chance to go for that line quite a bit playing this deck, and it is really awesome when you can. But even just pulling this card out at level 2, which you will have the ability to do so with the Climax combo, this card can push extra damage throughout the game pretty similarly to how Love Live Sunshine would use Yo to push extra damage throughout the game. This card's pretty big, comes down 10-5. You'll flee down the support. It's going to be a 12k, have the backup going up to 15. The fact that you will be bringing this card out with either Climax combo, because just like our quote-unquote level 1 combo that stands a card that you could use to stand this, if you have a 2-1 Climax combo on the board, you could just stand this Tomoka and attack and still get the effect, since her burn effect is inherent to her and not related to a Climax combo. She has her own Climax combo to stand herself. But at the beginning of the attack phase, when you play her standby, if this card's in the front row and you have 5 or less cards in your hand, you can do one of the following 2 effects of your choice. You can stand this, or you can pay 1 sec to Climax, and as long as you have a completely full board, burn your opponent for 3. So you have some options there for damage. Early in level 2, in the mid game, you are ideally pulling this card out and immediately standing it, swinging into your opponent and burning them with the first effect. But if you need that guaranteed damage on your finisher turns, you can pay 1, send that Climax to waiting room, and burn your opponent for 3 before the battle phase starts. Now, I mentioned earlier that once you hit level 2, all of your Climaxes basically become the same. And that's because you can use both of these Climax combos to immediately stand Tomoka to the field. The more Tomokas you can put out and attack with, the more chances you have to burn your opponent with that first effect and push the game forward in your favor. It is actually really cool that basically all of your Climaxes become the same. It's pretty liberating, the fact that you just need a Climax to go off. Again, we have a check 3 Brainstorm, but we don't have to dig for a specific card to make sure we can bring out these Tomokas. We just have to hit 1 Climax out of 8, which is pretty easy off just 1 check 3 on our second deck when we are compressed. Supporting that Tomoka at level 3, we have a couple of early plays. We have this healer if it plays on a full board, which can sometimes be a little awkward, but we have those pop back cards cards to open up a slot to maybe stand a card or Tomoka in another lane. And then for each character in our opponent's back row, this gains 1,000 power, so it will hopefully be a 10-5. And then it has a unique heal ability where you can discard a card from your hand to, as long as you have 2 or more other characters, you can choose a card in your clock and add it to your hand. Notably, this can pick up cards from your clock. So say you refresh point a climax, you play this card down at level 2, discard a card from your hand, you can actually pick up that climax from your clock. These usually can only pick up characters, so the fact that this can pick up anything is actually really cool. You can also, of course, grab our holo events out of clock if we happen to take those as damage. I'm including the 86 early play in here just because I think it is a cool option, and obviously we are in a lot of red. You could just play 3 of the previous early play if you'd like, but I think this card is pretty cool. It early plays if your opponent has a level 3 character. On play, choose a character in your clock, send it to bottom deck, so still a weird heal, no general heals here. And then it has an act effect where you can pay 1, give this card 1,000 power, and when this card gets a reverse, you send that character to top deck. So you can put a guaranteed damage, quote unquote, on top of your opponent's deck, as well as just having a repeatable act. If you really need to pay down to something, this can be a 1 card way to do that, even pay down to 4, and at least you get something out of it, as well as getting extra power. But it's mostly here just for that, you know, if your opponent's in a weird scenario, you can top deck that good damage or get a really nasty card off the board. With this, it'll be 11, back row support, go to 12-5, tap the Taiga, that would go to 14-5 before anything else. Have the Tomoka down from a previous turn, that's 15, and then you can hard remove that card from the board and hopefully get into your opponent's clock with a follow-up swing. Just to give you an option there, as well as it is another early play healer, but the condition is a little bit wonky compared to just full board, but only 1 of this and 2 of the other one. Again, you could just play 3 of this. And lastly, we have the Taiga stock swap. This card also has all players can't play backup from hand, so anti-backup plays around those tap counters, which is really nice. Doesn't play around events though. Your opponent can still play event counters in this card's lane, but they can't play character backups. And then it has the effect where on play, pay 1, true stock swap on your opponent, send all of your opponent's stock to waiting room, send the same number of cards from the top of their deck to stock, and then you can optionally, instead of that, burn your opponent for 1, and this card gains 2k. That'll be pretty big, starting out at 12, back row support, 13-5, tap it down, 15-5. This card can be not only really big, but you know, your opponent can't play backup. So 12k or 13-5, this is in front of the assist, is probably enough without backups to get up one of your opponent's cards if you need to reverse something at level 3. So taking a look at the deck again, we're not playing any level 1s, and I kind of want to get into some of these alternative options that you could play. There are definitely some flex spots in the deck, that accelerator and last order. You could shave one of the level 1/2 ones here to jam in some more cards, maybe shave down on the stock swap, just because we do have quite a bit of yellow in the deck. Maybe shave down there to 1 to fit some other cards in. And there are a lot of cards that I've seen in other builds of 8 standby and just other board-based Dengeki Bunko decks that are definitely pretty good. The first one is obviously the 2k counter. The reason I'm not playing the 2k counter in the deck is the way that my early games would go is because the level 0s aren't exactly very selective and aren't exactly super high quality in terms of controlling the board. You're just trying to like rip through your deck as quickly as possible to find this 2/1, to have the Yukina in your grave to then stand it, or the very worst, this other 2/2 to then stand it, to at least have a board presence on your first level 1 turn. Getting that together in the hand and in the waiting room was enough of a hassle that to actually see this 2k counter, I really wanted to play 2 of it, and I didn't want to concede like playing less level 0s, like playing 14 or 15 level 0s, just to have the option of maybe backing up this 2/1, when instead I could just play 4 of the 2/1, and if my 2/1 got run over, I never really cared about playing down another one instead of, you know, backing it up to save it and losing the card in hand. So just replaying the 2/1, having more of it so that my Sashas would rip into it more often. I was able to see it off my lens that I would use early at level 0, or just naturally draw and clock into them. The fact that I could maybe have a second one to play on a following turn, as well as, you know, just being a stock out, we want to pay out our heavy cards to stand by them in a standby deck, as well as pay out our climaxes early. Just replaying it instead of trying to have have the 2K in the hand just was a better play pattern to me. So I ended up cutting the 2K counters to play more utility level zeros. The other card that makes its way into a lot of these decks that play the Yukina and are focused on board is this Baccano level 0. It has that stunner effect that's been really good against Gura. So if Gura is somehow still a thing that people are playing by the time Dengeki Bunko 30th anniversary comes out in English, that is something that you could consider, but hopefully that is not the world we live in. But it has this other awesome effect that's very similar to the Poa effect from 8 Standby Hololive. When this card attacks, choose one of your other characters. It gets 1,000 power and hand on core until the end of your opponent's next turn. So you can give cards like the 2-1 Yukina or the 2-1 Climax combo hand on core so that you can go off on the following turn. Again, this sort of goes in line with how I was experiencing the 0 into 1 with this deck, where putting all this together, where the 2-1 was in grave and 2-1 was in my hand and Tomoka was in my level, and I was still, you know, playing the level 0 and sort of playing the way that 8 Standby wants to, where we have our big grave, but take our time, build our army. Even though we're standing cards, we still want to, if we can, take more time to fill our grave with more targets. That is always good. It was just better to, again, have multiple 2-1s so that if one was run over, if one was killed, because it is a high level target, because it could just stand another card if we stay at level 1. Our opponent kind of wants to kill this more than they even want to kill our Yukinas, since the Yukinas plus is random off the top of our deck. If our opponent goes after this, with the way our board works out, it's a lot easier for us to just have another one in hand, pay one, play down another standby, and stand another card that way. And then we have our 3 big lanes in the front over a 2-turn cycle, as opposed to trying to have this card to save our cards or trying to have the 2K counter to protect the cards that we already have down. Just a little bit much to try to get all those things together, considering all the moving parts that we have, when the play pattern of just playing down another 2-1 was pretty much always good enough. Unless, of course, you're playing into something like Alice. Hopefully Alice isn't around when this deck comes out in English either. And with that, I think we are pretty much done here with the deck, having it up on screen here again at the end. I think it is a really fun, unique deck. It plays differently than a lot of the standby decks that we've seen recently. This sort of stand a card is sort of seen as an antiquated kind of standby deck, where you would just kind of stand a big beater. But now we have cards like the Yukina that do really cool stuff, as well as really powerful cards like the Tomoka that can push extra damage, kind of in the vein of Love Live Sunshine's Yo. Of course, you get to play a single deck in Neo Standard that has a bunch of different anime properties in it, and a bunch of anime properties a lot of people, including myself, really like, that don't have their own full sets in Weiss. You have stuff like Toradora, stuff like Strike the Blood, you have even newer stuff like Demon Lord up here with Sasha, and of course Railgun, stuff like that. Love Railgun decks. So you get to have all this really cool art mixing all these different animes together, and the deck's actually pretty strong and pretty effective too. So definitely check this one out. When it comes to English, it has a ton of SPs, so it will probably be opened to the moon and back, and this deck will probably be pretty affordable after the initial rush, as always. And with that, I think we are done here. I know it's been slow on the content side. We're trying to get better with that. We have had a lot of our people been very busy with tournaments for other trading card games, as well as just a ton of life stuff, weddings, and very good but busy stuff, keeping us from being able to get together to do our more longer content, of which there is a lot more for us to do now. A lot more set reviews for not only Dengeki, but a bunch of other stuff, as well as more sets upcoming in terms of English originals. We got that Ruby Premium Booster announced, as well as Guilty Gear later this year. So be on the lookout for more set reviews. They are all coming soon. Just got to get over that scheduling hurdle. And with that, Pittsburgh White Sports signing off. See you all in the next one.